Hello, everyone. My name is James Morale, and I am the Director of Prevention and Outreach at Hopeful Horizons.
And I'm CJ Akins. I'm the volunteer coordinator.
Since 1983, April has been designated National Child Abuse Prevention Month. What that means is that throughout the whole year, but especially throughout the month of April, communities across the U.S. are encouraged to increase and provide education and support to families through resources and strategies to prevent child abuse and neglect. While the issue of child abuse can be very broad, what CJ and I wanted to do is to focus on a critical topic, mandatory reporting, which is currently being impacted in a huge way due to the stay-at-home order stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So, CJ, let's start with you. What is mandatory reporting?
The mandatory reporting is where an individual in the professional capacity has come across somebody who's made a discovery, a disclosure, or they have a suspicion that a child is being abused. And so under the law, that has activated their responsibility to make a report to either law enforcement or to Child Protective Services.
Now, what makes mandatory reporting so important?
So what really makes it important is that you want to make sure that that child is getting the help that they need. You're not necessarily making an accusation. You're not saying that this person has done something wrong. You're just saying that there is something concerning here that needs to be investigated. Because if there is a chance that the child has been abused, it could have long-term effects on their mental and physical health. In fact, the study for the adverse childhood experiences shows that trauma and abuse carries over into a person's adult life as well, affecting things like diabetes, heart conditions, hypertension, obesity rates go up. We see that these things that are happening in childhood are going to carry over. It can also be fatal for a child to remain in an abusive situation. We've seen where children have actually died as a result of abuse.
Tell us how mandatory reporting actually works, and then once someone makes a mandatory report, what happens after the report is made?
So mandatory reporting works by an individual coming in contact with, again, that suspicion, discovery, or disclosure of abuse, and then they in their professional capacity. So, for example, say that a teacher witnesses a student being slapped in a grocery store. That's actually not covered by mandatory reporting because she's not in her professional capacity, and she's not, in the act of, receiving that abuse, disclosure, or discovery in the context of her work. But let's say that she notices a bruise on a kid's shoulder or, on their arm while she's teaching in her classroom. That would activate her responsibility to make a report. And so what would happen is that teacher would call either law enforcement or DSS. We actually encourage you to call both. That way they can communicate between the two agencies. And that way they can start the investigation and start looking into what's going on in this situation, who's living in the home, does this child need to be considered for being placed somewhere else where they're more safe. And once that investigation starts, usually they're going to have a forensic interview, and so that's where the child would come to Hope Horizons, law enforcement, DSS, other agency professionals who may be involved in that child abuse case is going to be in a closed-circuited room where they can watch the forensic interview going on. And so that's where a therapist is going to interview the child one-on-one while it's recorded via video and audio, so that it can be used at a later time to continue the investigation. So James, what are some of the signs of child abuse?
So as I answer that question, I want to first define what child abuse is. So the legal definition of child abuse or neglect occurs when a parent or guardian or other person responsible for that child's welfare inflicts or allows to be inflicted upon the child physical or mental injury, or they engage in acts of omission which present a substantial risk of physical or mental injury to the child. Now, that's a long, drawn-out legal definition, but simply put, it's abuse or neglect when a child is injured by the intentional acts or omissions of an adult. Now, there's many different examples of child abuse or neglect. Most people are certainly familiar with the signs of physical abuse, but failure to supply food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care qualifies as a form of abuse. Abandonment, exposure to violence, or sexual offenses are other forms of abuse as well. Now, the signs of these different forms of abuse can vary. Certainly, physical signs may be bruising, bleeding, broken bones. In the case of sexual abuse, there may be bruises, bumps, or scabs around the mouth or genitals, or maybe the child is having pain using the bathroom. We may see also emotional and or behavioral signs that are more common. So things like anxiety, withdrawals, fear, depression, unexplained anger and rebellion. And then you may also see things like self-harm or bullying or the use of alcohol and drugs. But certainly, like any of these erratic behaviors and things that you see differently within children that could be some red flags. While these signs aren't necessarily exclusive to child abuse, they certainly are things that we should all look out for.
I think I would also just add, any sort of abnormal behavior that's not normal for that child. Like even if they're playing house with their brothers and sisters and they're doing so in a way that's inappropriate. We also see a lot of times, that ADHD type symptoms and the oppositional behavior. Maybe there's a change in their school performance as well. Like if their grades are usually, pretty high, or they're doing pretty well and then they start to drop off, that's usually a sign that there's something different. And it could be trauma of COVID-19. It could be, their dietary issues have changed or something, but it could also be abuse. And so it's just something to keep in mind and consider. How has COVID-19 affected the way that abuse is reported?
Wow, that's a great question. Because like you mentioned, CJ, usually reports are made from those who work with children in different capacities through disclosure, which is when a child tells an adult about abuse, discovery, which is when an adult witnesses or knows by another means that abuse has happened, or suspicion, which is when someone sees the signs in a child or witnesses boundary violations by adults or maybe other older children. The fact that many people across the nation have been under stay-at-home orders means that disclosures, discovery, and suspicion are at minimum right now. People like teachers aren't working with and observing students right now. Daycare and after-school care workers aren't able to interact with children. But that's why I think it's really important for us to stay vigilant and to utilize the tools that we have to continue to protect children. Right? So thankfully, we live in a time where we have many different digital platforms to stay connected. So utilizing things like FaceTime or a number of the messaging platforms that are available can allow us to continue to check in on the youth and the guardians of those youth in our social circles. I always say, the people that you know, right? This is what you were alluding to in the last question. So pay attention to the communication that you receive. If you see differences in behavior, or if you see high stress or anxiety in a household, these can be moments for us to know the local resources and or support in our community that we can help continue to keep kids safe.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, also just thinking about like if a teacher's doing a Zoom meeting with a kid and they notice something different, or if you're out on a walk and you notice something's different about that house, or that kid that's normally playing outside within the yard is now keeping sequestered. And just noticing those little differences and changes can make a big difference in being there to intervene if something is abusive going on.
Absolutely. So the last part of your answer just kind of made me think about another question for you. What if you are taking a walk in your neighborhood or exercising or whatever you might be doing? Do you have to be a mandated reporter to make a report?
It's a great question. You are not required by law to make a report, but that doesn't mean that you are prevented from making a report. So anybody can make a report of child abuse, and in fact, other states have actually made statewide mandatory reporting laws where anyone who witnesses abuse is then responsible for making that report. Unfortunately, South Carolina's not there yet, but we can still have a moral responsibility to want to intervene when we see child abuse happening. And again, you're not making an accusation of something happening. You're just saying, this is not normal. This is something's different about what's going on now. We want to make sure that this child is being taken care of and that they're getting the help that they need. And again, it could be that abuse is not happening, but maybe something else is. And then that's how that child then gets the help that they need.
Absolutely. And I just, I ditto everything you say. And I just wanted to add, that it's our responsibility as adults to ensure the safety of all kids, right? Because what we do know is that the numbers don't lie, and, kids are abused all the time, unfortunately. And so by making a good faith report, if you have a suspicion, there's nothing wrong with that. I'd rather somebody make a good faith report because they had a suspicion that something happened and allow law enforcement to do their jobs than for somebody to just ignore something that they may have seen or was suspicious of and do nothing. So absolutely, I totally agree with that. So like during these times of COVID-19 and staying at home orders, what does mandatory reporting look like right now?
So, like we were saying earlier, let's say that a teacher was meeting with a student and they noticed something different during an electronic meeting, whether that's Zoom or FaceTime or some sort of other electronic communication. If they notice something different, or a child discloses or they have a discovery of abuse, if you're still in your professional capacity and you're performing your duties under the mandated law, then you would still have to make a report to law enforcement. And the way that would work after the report has been made is law enforcement would still do an investigation, so a DSS, and then if needed, a forensic interview could be scheduled. So we would do an emergency FI. They would come to Hope Horizons and meet with a therapist and do the same sort of process. So not really much would change now that we have COVID-19, but it would be maybe some different methods of doing the investigation, or maybe we would take more precautions when that child is coming in for the forensic interview, wearing masks, making sure everything's sanitized, trying to keep our distance if we can, kind of limiting the contact and making sure that whenever somebody comes in contact with something, that's then wiped up afterwards. Because we want to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and not putting anyone in any danger coming in for a forensic interview.
And so I think the main message that you're putting out there to us is that Hope for Horizons, and what about other child serving agencies like law enforcement, those kind of things? Everybody's still open, correct?
Correct. So they're still doing investigations. They're still moving forward because child abuse does not stop for the pandemic, unfortunately. In fact, it probably will increase because of the tight confounds of not being able to leave the house, limited interaction. So that's another way that we can help prevent child abuse, is by making sure that a child still knows that you're a person that you can be in contact with. If something is happening, you can be that trusted adult that they talk to.
What do you hope the community knows after watching this interview?
What I really hope the community knows is you could be the difference between a better life for a child than if you just ignore it. A child is probably only going to disclose once, maybe twice. And so what we're hoping is that when a child makes that disclosure, they're going to have somebody who they trust, and that they're going to move forward with making sure that that child is taken care of.
Good deal. Yes, I totally agree with you, CJ. And for me, after watching this interview, I would just want people to know that there's still opportunity to protect children. Even though we have the stay-at-home orders basically across the nation, we still can be vigilant and we still can do things to protect children. Many people are moving towards these digital platforms, like I mentioned before. So, continue to keep an eye out, like check on family members, check on friends, make sure that the stress level and the anxiety is down. Let's be kind to each other, right? And look out for each other. And the mission of protecting children isn't over. It won't stop, like you said. Child abuse, unfortunately, is one of those things that is here, and we need to continue to make sure that we protect children. So, on behalf of Hopeful Horizons, CJ, our volunteer coordinator, and myself, we just want to thank everybody for tuning in, for taking time to listen to us talk about this very, very important topic. And not only in the month of April, but continuously on every day, on a daily basis. Let's all be vigilant at bringing awareness, and education surrounding the reality of child abuse. And let's all work together to stop child abuse from happening, prevent it from happening, and protect the children that we all know and love.